Hello, Dr. Laszlo. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. Good to talk with you. We had some kind of a little problem with getting the link from Sarah, but finally I got it.
Oh, that's okay. I have my schedule is flexible, so I have time. So I
Good.
think I think Sarah said that you had about 30 minutes to give to this interview. Is that correct?
Well, after that it gets a bit sort of tiring, but 30 minutes, a good conversation is fine.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's go ahead and get started. First of all, I want to thank you for allowing us to do this interview. Your name came to us by the founder of the Institute for Global Transformation, Dr. Marianne Miller, who is the founder of that institute, and I am a board director there.
I see.
So, yeah, so we were talking about starting a book club next month, and we are. And your book was listed in our newsletter, and I read the excerpt of your book, and then I went and ordered your book, and I read it. I said this would be the best book to start our book club. So yeah, so I'm excited about that. So I want to thank Sarah Sagat. I'm sorry, Sarah Scarlett, who's your publicist, for arranging this interview.
Yes,
So,
she's the publicist for the publisher. Yeah.
yeah, so at the Institute for Global Transformation, our vision is a world working together to utilize the power, love, and wisdom of higher consciousness to benefit humanity and the planet. Our mission is to support transformations in consciousness and in the way humanity interacts with one another so as to bring about positive change in the world individually and collectively.
Wonderful. That's a very noble mission.
Yeah, well, thank you. And again, my name is Henry Shelton, and for the audience, I have with me now on the call Dr. Ervin Laszlo, who's a system philosopher, an integral theorist, and a concert pianist. So I'm going to read his brief bio, and then we're going to get into the interview. A celebrated child prodigy as a pianist in Budapest with public appearances from the age of 9. Ervin became the recipient of the grand prize at the renowned Geneva International Music Competition, which allowed him to cross the Iron Curtain and began an international concert career, first in Europe, then in America. At the initiative of Senator Claude Pepper of Florida, he was awarded a U.S. citizenship prior to his 21st birthday by an act of Congress. Dr. Laszlo went on to become the recipient of various honors and awards, including honorary PhDs from the United States, Canada, Finland, and Hungary, and honorary professorship at the Institute of Technology at Buenos Aires, and honorary citizenship of the city of Buenos Aires. He's also the founder and president of the Club of Budapest, and founder and director of the Laszlo Institute of New Paradigm Research, which is a new paradigm research is a transdisciplinary inquiry into humanly and socially relevant ideas and conceptions emerging above all in the science, but also in social media and other areas of contemporary culture. The purpose of the research is to articulate a coherent, meaningful view of the human being and his or her world based on cutting-edge science and scientific research. So on that note, Dr. Laszlo, I want to just ask you some basic questions about yourself. So, and then I'm going to do the interview in 3 parts, and then I'll go into your books, Reconnecting to the Source, and also your new book, which I just finished reading, which is A Global Shift Now, Call to Evolution. So what does it mean to be a systems philosopher and an integral theorist? What does that mean to our audience?
Well, contemporary knowledge is segmented. It's put into disciplinary boxes, as it were, as though nature could be segmented like that into physical, biological, psychological, social, cultural parts. But this is how knowledge has been pursued for the past 100 years, 150 years. And it's time to bring about a kind of integration which corresponds to the integrality that we find in nature, on Earth, and in the universe. The new findings in physics, especially quantum physics and cosmology, show that this is not a separable universe, a universe of separable parts. It is a whole universe, a whole system. So the way that to deal with this recognition, this finding that there are no absolute boundaries in nature, in society either. The way to deal with that is to create a holistic, integral framework. And now the basic tools for that are given, because we now know how to deal with systems, with complex systems, how to integrate the elements of complex systems, how to recognize the purpose, the mission, the orientation that is underlying such systems, which is then expressed in the evolution or continuous development of such systems. So systems philosophy is an attempt to reestablish the oneness, the wholeness that leading edge science finds in nature, in the world. And this is an attempt to do so by scientific means, not being more speculative than one absolutely has to, keep to the facts, but do not hesitate to go beyond the facts to encompass that larger reality which the modern mainstream science excludes of its vision. So it's a reform, a revolution, if you like, in scientific thinking based on a new science, or what I like to call the new paradigm science.
Awesome, and that's kind of the approach you take with the Laszlo Institute. That's got his subtitle. So, how did you go from being a concert pianist to becoming a systems philosopher, if I may?
Well, it was a natural progression, although it was not planned. It was not designed. It came about, but in retrospect, I see that as absolutely logical. Because music, referring to what I just said, music is always a whole system. A great piece of music cannot be segmented into parts. You cannot leave out any part. If you have a symphony or a quartet by Mozart, you cannot take a measure, even a single measure out of it, and the whole thing will lack its coherence. So great art, great music are coherent, are integral. And this is the integrality, the coherence that I was seeking through the sciences, through the instruments, the methods of observation and analysis and theory construction in science. One can reconstruct to a large extent the integrality, the wholeness of nature by the appropriate basic assumptions in science. So I have been attempting for the past, I don't know how many years. My first book in this area was published in 1963. And since then I published over 90 books. And I've been attempting to recreate the wholeness that there is there in nature that we're beginning to recognize. And that I should add, a wholeness that we need very much in our day. When we are looking for meaning, we're looking for ways to proceed, which will be in tune with each other and with the nature, with the ecology around us. So the new integral science is both theoretically appropriate and correct, I believe, and valid, and also practically important. And it has an unparalleled importance in these periods of crisis and transformation.
Yeah, I like that concept because what we found today in business and science, in our social environment, is that oftentimes the ends that we pursue have become disconnected from nature, and in many cases disharmonious with nature. So I like the way that you pursue that approach, that paradigm, and put it back together. In your bio, it mentions that you worked on modeling the future evolution of world order at Princeton, and you presented a report to the Club of Rome. That caught my attention because one of my late mentors was also involved in the Club of Rome. So could you speak to that initiative?
Well, I was nicely minding my own business, as it were, systems philosophy at the State University of New York, when I got a call from Princeton. And this call was asking me if I would join the project on World Order Project, it was called at the time, out of the Woodrow Wilson School in the University of Princeton. And I said at that time, well, that's not my field, world order. I know very little about it. I'm a systems theorist, and why should I join that? What can I do? The reply was, never mind this question of what we should be doing. We'll find the relevance, because they said in the Princeton Institute, they said, we learned, we knew, read some of your recent publications, and we believe it's very relevant to world order studies. I said, okay, I'm willing to try it. So I went for a semester to Princeton from the State University of New York, and he was giving seminars. Then I had a chance at the Woodrow Wilson School, and I had a chance to interact with some very important people. And out of this interaction grew a book called A Strategy for the Future, which was, I think, in the early 1970s.
Okay.
And this was a systems approach to world order. I think that was the subtitle. So you see, I was joining my interest and the skills and expertise in systems theory and systems philosophy with the questions of world order. And now then, this project in turn called the attention of the then president and founder of the Club of Rome, which was Aurelio Peccei. And Peccei from Rome, who was a leading businessman, a second man in fiat worldwide, and he developed this great interest in and conviction that business itself has to adapt itself. You cannot grow indefinitely in a finite world. So the idea of modeling world systems using systems approach caught Peccei's attention, and he asked me if I would write a report to the Club of Rome. These were the reports that were famous in the 1970s, the first one having been No Limits to Growth. And I wrote a report on the new paradigm, on the new thinking coming about in relation to our life, our future on the planet. And this was sponsored, the preparation, the research for it was undertaken at the United Nations, at the Institute of Research and Training and Research, UNITAR. So I was asked to come into UNITAR. I was a fellow for a year. Then I furnished this report to the Club of Rome. Then UNITAR asked me, the executive director of UNITAR asked me to stay on. I became a director of programs at UNITAR. And when that expired, it was in 1970, I believe, then Secretary General Kurt Waldheim asked me if I would stay on and develop the systemic thinking in relation to the North-South problems. So I stayed another 4 years, and out of that came quite a few publications collaboratively with Research Institute North and South, taking a systems approach to world order, to the practical dimension. How do you harmonize the aims, the objectives, and the policies of the advanced technological and economically wealthy and advanced countries of the North with the developing and highly promising countries in the other parts of the world? That was the attempt, and I was very much committed to that. I still am, matter of fact. But after 4 years, I decided that I'm going to pursue on my own basis, in a freelance basis, my own research interest. Then I retired, as it were. I'm working more than ever since then. I had taken a sabbatical, meaning for 1 year, to go to my old farmhouse in Tuscany. That was in 1984, and that sabbatical is still lasting today. In the meanwhile, of course, I've done many things. I've been advisor to the United Nations University in Tokyo, then the Club of Rome, continues my work there, and then founded the Club of Budapest, as well as the institute that bears my name.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. So you subsequently formed the Club of Budapest. So what led you to, I guess you sort of said it there, is there a distinct essence to the Club of Budapest versus the Club of Rome, which led you to form it?
A distinct approach.
Yes.
The mission, the orientation, the goals, I think, are the same. Create a harmonious, working, all-round beneficial global system on this planet. That is the basic mission which we share. However, the approach. The Club of Rome's approach has been primarily working with leaders, with prime ministers, with presidents, with top business people, limited to 100 people, 100 members, and all of these, most of these 100 members are either great business people or great politicians. I felt that there is a need to involve the bulk of the population, the so-called average person, the person who bears the brunt of the problems, that is also carries on its shoulders the promise of a better future. How to involve these people, not through the top, not by top down, but by addressing the concerns directly to them, and to address these concerns in a way that everybody can understand. We need artists, we need communicators, we need actors and actresses, we need writers. And then I founded a club, which initially was called the Actors and Writers Club. But then since this club had its first initial meeting, which was formative for its future, was held in my native city, which is Budapest in Hungary. My colleagues felt that we could just as well call it the Club of Budapest. And they established the headquarters in Budapest, which still exists, is still working. And that was then the formation of the Club of Budapest, celebrating at the same time the launch of a manifesto, which I had the privilege to write together with the Dalai Lama at the time, which is a manifesto on the spirit of planetary consciousness. We still have that, we still treasure that, we can still publish it. And that was the basis for the Club of Budapest, and to a large extent also the further basis for my own efforts.
That's impressive. Before I go into talking about points from your book, Reconnecting to the Source, I have a question on the city of Budapest. I heard you say in an interview somewhere that once upon a time there were two separate cities, Buda and Pest, and there was a bridge that connected them, and the name became Budapest. And I think something about that bridge became a part of your logo or your philosophy, or could you talk about that?
Indeed, that's quite entirely right, as you say. There was Buda and there was Pest. Buda was a historic city. There was the location of the royal palace with all the royal residents of the Middle Ages. And Pest was the industrial city where the bulk of the modern population settled. And the two cities were working separately and only by ferry boat moving from one to another, which is a very limited commerce and very limited communication with the methods and technologies that were available at the time. But then when they built a bridge, which was the first bridge to be built at this span, at this very large span, entirely supported by chains. Two large pillars supported by chains, and the rest of the roadway, between them supported by chains. Beautiful bridge still exists, still is very much at work, very much functioning today. Now having vehicular traffic going through it. But this chain bridge, being a historic element of the unification of two separate units, to bring them together and to work together to create a single city. This became a motto of the Club of Budapest, and the bridge itself, the image of the bridge itself became the logo.
Wow, that's an amazing It's an amazing story, but it's an amazing metaphor for your work, and it's amazing that it originated in your hometown. That's quite synchronistic to me. So, speaking of synchronicities, I want to talk about your book, and I want to ask you a few questions from it. Reconnecting to the Source: The New Science of Spiritual Experience, how it can change you and how it can transform the world. Now, in this short time we have left, I'm also ask you about this book that I just received last week, Global Shift Now. But this is the Reconnecting to the Source is the one we're going to discuss initially in our book club. But I couldn't resist this book because it's the other book because it speaks to the current situation. But on reconnecting to the source and based on this metaphor, how do we as individuals and society go from thinking in Newtonian paradigms to thinking and acting in a quantum paradigm, sort of as that the city of Budapest did with the two separates? How do we go from that?
Well, the quantum paradigm is really the paradigm of the new sciences, the new paradigm of the systems sciences. When I founded systems philosophy per se in the late 1960s, early 1970s, quantum physics was a very highly abstract discipline only for the few specialists. Now we know that the quantum view of the world, the quantum worldview is of interest and is of importance for everyone. So we have created an institute to develop this quantum-based new systems philosophy to orient us. So your question was, would you have any mind posing it again, precisely the question?
Sure. I just wanted to know, how do we as individuals, and you outline it in your books, and I just want the audience to hear you say, how do we go as individuals and societies from thinking in the Newtonian paradigm to the quantum paradigm?
There is a motivation. The world governed by the Newtonian paradigm is breaking down.
Yes.
It is beset by crisis. If it wouldn't have been the virus crisis, there would have been the sea level crisis, sea level rise crisis, or the warming of the atmosphere, or the drying out of the productive lands, or the refugee crisis that was provoked by all this, or various conflicts that are becoming bloodier and bloodier. All of these are crisis points which tell us that we can't go on like this. Now there is, and my new little book actually just speaks to that topic, there is a way to shift from this, and the shift is through crisis. Usually it's through crisis. Something has to provoke it. We try to make the crisis not so bloody and violent so that it creates human sacrifice. But a crisis is very often necessary. Now, in reconnecting to the source, I didn't know about this crisis coming out. I wrote it about a year ago. It was published on March 24th of this year. And it turned out that it became more relevant than I ever thought.
Wow.
Because we need to get back to the source. And the source is precisely what we mentioned earlier. The source is this coherent, harmonious, integral universe, nature as one. Nature to which we can relate, nature which we can apprehend with our intellect, but also with our emotions. We can appreciate it with an intellect, and we can embrace it with our love through our emotions. So this is the recognition which prompted me to write this book on reconnecting to the source, getting back to what we were truly meant to be, because we are born as part of evolution on this planet. We are a complex system evolving in a complex web of life in the biosphere. We are meant to be cooperative. Instead of that, we have created a world which is competitive, which has rivalries, which has conflicts, and which is no longer able to maintain the equilibria, the balances that are required for a healthy, happy, and sound life. So the need is becoming more and more evident, much more evident even than I knew when I wrote the book. But in a way, the world itself has caught up with it. Now we can really ask, how do we reconnect to the source? Because we know that we have got to reconnect to something larger than we are, something better than this power and money hungry world which based on rivalries and on conflict. We know this, and now this needs to be recognized. One important element in this book is this recognition can come about, what I call, and many people call, the spiritual experience. Having an experience, it was an amazing experience for me on a personal level. I've asked colleagues and people whom I knew for having high integrity, outstanding people, have you had an experience that really transformed your life? And to my amazement, every one of them said, yes, there was such an experience. It's made them what they are today. And I asked them, would you recount that experience? And they agreed. And now we have in this book, I believe, some 19 or so stories, what I call the bouquet of spiritual experiences, including then a short one on my mind, which are similar to what I told you, from coming from music and to coherence into science. But this is an amazing fact that all of these stories, written independently, nobody knew about any of the others. Nobody knew about the rest of the book either. I just asked them, write down your experience. And they did, and they all ended up by saying, and the depths of this experience, the culmination of it, there is this sense of unrelenting, reciprocal, and unconditional love. That is the true basis of what you realize when you have this experience. And this is such a hopeful sign. If you can just have more of these experiences, we would not pursue this world, which is so prone to crisis, but we look for a better world, a more harmonious world, which we can create because the old world has been shaken. Now it's a choice. Now we must move forward. We do not need to try to recreate the old. That would be catastrophic. We have a choice, and this is an opportunity. So on the one hand, I'm describing spiritual experience as a means for moving forward on this. And on the other, this new little book, I'm just saying this is the opportunity and we better do it as fast as possible.
Thank you for that. And I have to tell you, I read each of the stories of the individuals in the book that shared their spiritual experience, and they were each profound in their own way, including the ones about the dolphins, the one about the synchronicity with the ducks, the one about the guy asking about, give me another name for God, and Sam came to him, and it turns out Sam was a Hebraic representation of the name of God. So these things were all amazing, and your own with the music and how it inspired you to when you were the music. Okay, so yeah, I mean, I was just astonished by all of the stories by each of the individuals, including Jane Goodall. So my question is, and so they all had that spiritual experience, and I was saying, including your own experience, where you would play on the piano, and that would sort of inform you or give you sort of a harmonious coherence with the source. And from that, you just came away and you started writing. And then a book came out of that whole experience. How do we go from embracing religion and the notion of an all-powerful God, more of an anthropomorphic type of God, to accepting this new paradigm and implementing that? How do we do that?
This is nothing new, in the history of culture. Practically all of the non-Western religions, other than the so-called Abrahamic religions, Christianity, Muslim, and Jewish religion, all the other religions are talking more what we would call an immanent God. It's a God that's part of nature, that is in the universe. Now, I have nothing against trying to understand this deep motivation as the presence of a higher consciousness. I think that's inevitable that we believe that that we maintain that there is a higher consciousness, more than the human, that is behind the way this world has evolved, what it has become, and how it is moving. Great Einstein, Max Planck, Heisenberg, Jung, and all these scientists and many more have expressed their belief that there is an intelligence behind the workings of nature. So all we have to do, I mean, I'm not trying to belittle it, it's a tremendous step actually, but what we need to do is recognize that there is this deeper intelligence. I even wrote a book called The Intelligence of the Cosmos 2 years ago. So there is this deeper intelligence, but that this deeper intelligence is in every quantum in the world, in every cell of our body. It's
Right.
all there. It's not outside, it's inside, it's in us. We are in the world, but the world is in us also, because it's all suffused with this higher intelligence, this higher motivation. That is good science. I think it's good religion, and it's good experiential spirituality.
Okay. Well, we're approaching the end of the hour, the end of the 30 minutes. So I want to bring up two terms you use that I personally think, if you explain them and people understand them, it will help bridge the gap between traditional religion and quantum science. Because at the end of the day, they're the same, but we just use different terminology. So in your book, you use the term holotropic attractor or holotropic lure. And you talked about this as a tool to reconnect with source and evolve our way of thinking. So if you can elaborate on that, and then I might ask you to give I think Kingsley Dennis in your book gave some examples of holotropic developments in the world. So you outlined that so meticulously. So explain to us what a holotropic attractor or holotropic lure, how does that work with us?
Well, it's precisely what I was saying a moment ago, that there is some higher intelligence, but how does this manifest itself? One way is to say that there is a wise old man sitting outside the universe and dictating what we should be doing. But another thing is to believe that it's all in the universe. It's encoded in the universe. Now, what is the form in which it's encoded? Here, I think if we want to be scientifically credible, then we can say it's encoded as an attractor. Now, an attractor is something that is postulated, that is believed to operate in complex systems, insofar as the systems are not random. If they move in some direction, then there is something that moves them in this direction. It doesn't have to be an external force. Something that moves them in this direction is something that's in them, that's part of them. And it's an attractor. An attractor is what makes a system tend in a given direction, toward a point, toward a repeating phase, anything that is other than pure randomness. There is an attractor already operating. Now, if you find in the universe a direction which is toward coherence, toward wholeness, toward oneness, toward integrality, all these things that we have been talking about just now, if so, then the attractor in the universe must be one that is moving toward wholeness, that is holotropic. Holos means one in classical Greece, and tropic or tropein, or in classical Greeks, means a tendency toward something. Even if you have tropism, you have a movement, you have a tendency, an attraction to move in some direction. So precisely, a holotropic attractor is a built-in tendency in the universe toward building systems which are integral, complex, coherent systems. This is what we have disregarded in classical science, mechanistic science, Newtonian science. Newton himself was very open to such ideas. He believed that there is a deeper sense, a deeper meaning behind the movement of matter. But he expressed it in mathematical, and it was so successful that his followers disregarded his ideas, and they just went on creating the Newtonian paradigm, which Newton himself was never quite happy with and certainly would not accept later on. Now we know that this new paradigm is more appropriate, more fused with, more corresponding with reality. How do we go about it? We recognize that underlying the complex and technical theories of science, there's a common motivation. And this common motivation is the search for meaning and ultimately the search for finding, for coherence, for finding how one thing works with another. Einstein said it very well. He said, in science, we seek the simplest possible scheme that can tie together the facts. And this simplest possible scheme is a coherence. Einstein also added that the greatest miracle in this universe is that it's so coherent. So finding coherence is actually the same thing as finding the Word of God. On the one hand, religion, on the other hand, science. They're looking for the same thing expressed in different words. So it's not a big jump. It's not a change you move from deep experience, spirituality, expressed in the deepest sources of religion, is the same motivation and it's the same recognition, the same finding as you have in highest level of science.
Wow, thank you for that. And well, I'll end it by making a crossover to your new book, Global Shift Now. And what you just said aligns with what you say in chapter 6 in the book. You say your role in building a better world, and you outline that by talking about updating your beliefs, updating your what's the second one here? Adapt your aspirations and live with diversity. Those three things, to me, those three components are practical steps and aspects to creating coherence within human society. If you want to speak to that, and we'll let this be the last question, I would let you, that comes from your new book, Global Shift Now. How do we recover from this? How do we move forward from this global pandemic and create a better world through those practical steps?
Two things. One is recognize that this is an opportunity. It's a historic and unrecurring opportunity, certainly in our lifetime. We don't want to have such basic global crisis again to shake us, to make us aware. We can now time to wake up. And the other thing is to recognize that underneath the diversity, underneath the seeming chaos in the world, there is a higher movement, an attraction toward integrality and toward unity. And we are already building such a world, such a globally coherent world. It's at the leading edge of these changes that occur in society. And in many alternative cultures and the youth cultures, there is this element. There is a refusal to go back to this old hierarchical, competitive, racial, and segregational society, moving toward a single humanity where all participate, where all are members, and we in turn are members of a living species, of all living species in the biosphere. This is a natural movement, and it is coming about already because we have an opportunity to do so. So I think our chance is to create a better world. We can create it. Let's wake up together. And Ervin, let me just add, to do this, to wake up together is essential that we have some ideas on which we can base our thinking, that we can discuss among ourselves. And for that, to bring about books like you are presenting in your book, books that I'm trying to write, these are absolutely essential. We need to come to a discussion to understand who we are, and that here is finally the chance to create a better world.
Wow. Well, thank you, Doctor. I am so enthralled by both your books. These are the two I've read lately, but we're certainly going to be introducing, reconnecting to Source to our book club next month. And I understand that we may have the opportunity to have you back next month for another quick 30 minutes to introduce you to the club and the principles. So at the Institute for Global Transformation, we are creating a community of change makers. And as I said, I don't think there's no better premise to start this community. Well, we're not starting it out, we're continuing it, but we're doing some different things with connected with individuals like yourself online through Zoom now. And this is one of the things the coronavirus brought about. It put everybody to a place where we were forced now to reconnect with people online. And here we are talking, you and I think 7-hour difference across the waters, and it's a beautiful exchange. And I'm looking forward to sharing your wisdom, your book with our group. So I want to thank you again for taking the time out and giving us this interview today. And we look forward to continuing the dialogue, but more importantly, taking the 10 commandments that you wrote in your book, and I don't want to make it sound spiritual, but you have the 10 commandments of living a world of diversity. We're going to be talking about these and your 6 tenets, your six tenets for, I want to make sure I get it right. This is something that came out of the Wisdom Council from the Club of Budapest. What is it called? The 6 cardinal beliefs. So we're going to be talking about these, and we're going to be talking about how can we incorporate them into our individual lives and encourage others to do the same. So thank you for sharing that with the world, and thank you for allowing us the opportunity to interview you about that.
Let me just say it was a pleasure. It is a great pleasure to talk with you. You are so well informed, so thoroughly informed, and so thoroughly share these ideas and this vision. It was truly a pleasure. And I look forward to further working with you and with your group.
Thank you, Dr. Laszlo. You have a nice evening. I want to say I came to Rome last year, didn't get a chance to get to Tuscany, but Tuscany is I have some history with Tuscany in the sense that it's one of those, I did some research and it presented itself as a very ancient culture. That caught my attention. So one of these days I'm going to get back over to Italy and I'm going to make my way up to Tuscany. So,
you know, I sit here on a hilltop overlooking a valley that has been continuously not only inhabited, but continuously worked agriculture for 5,000 years.
Wow.
Before the Romans, because this was an area of the Etruscans.
Yes.
Who existed before the Romans, you know.
Yeah.
Then they disappeared when the Romans came, they disappeared after a few months, they were conquered. But this valley has been continuously inhabited and worked for over 5,000 years. So I came here because it's something attracted me to it, and I never regretted it.
The Etruscans, that's the culture, yeah.
The ancient culture, yes.
The ancient culture, yes. Well, thank you, sir. Again, you have a nice day, evening, and thank you for the interview.
Thank you indeed. It was my pleasure.
Bye-bye.